Hello, Teacups. I'm back! Finally, it's been quite a few weeks since I talked to you guys last. It's been a little crazy in my life, not gonna lie. Got sick. I'm fine, but I got sick. My mom got sick. Nothing serious, have no fear. But, and then school started. So I've been super busy dealing with that. I'm excited to be back in school, but I'm doing all online classes, so it's a little bit different. I've been having to, really pace myself and make sure I'm really super organized, because otherwise I will procrastinate. Much like filming this video, and also last week's video, and maybe a week before that? I don't know. I obviously don't know when the last time I filmed was. A while ago. I know that. But I'm back. Welcome back to school. For those who are in school, I'm in college. If you're also in college, give this video a like, because I don't really know who all my followers are in college. My very few followers, but my loyal ones nonetheless. Also, if you're not in college, give this video a like. Today, I am drinking some Tazo tea. It's mint tea. It's called RefreshMint. It's delicious. It's one of my favorites. I love mint tea. Even though it's not technically tea. If you don't know what that means, go check out my all you need to know about tea videos. You'll learn some stuff, and you'll see my face if you haven't seen my face before. All of this is explained in previous podcasts, so make sure you catch up. But today we are talking about something very near and dear to my heart, and we're also going to have a special guest, hopefully later, but I'll leave that for later. But for now, it's just going to be me, and we are talking about Lemp Mansion, which is in St. Louis, Missouri. I am not from St. Louis originally. I grew up in Illinois. Granted, I'm 20 minutes from St. Louis. I live in Edwardsville, Glen Carbon area, but my entire father's side of the family lives in St. Louis still, or most of them do. Obviously, my dad lives not there because we live in the same house, but a lot of my family is from St. Louis, and they all still live there, so I frequent there quite often. And Lemp Mansion is very near and dear to their hearts, my heart. It's a lovely property with quite a tragic backstory. Before we start, I want to give a little trigger warning. There is quite a few mentions of suicide in this podcast, so if you are sensitive to that, or you don't really want to hear about it, that's totally fine. I'm not offended. I want you guys to prioritize your mental health more than anything. If you need help, the suicide prevention hotline is linked below. There's lots of support for you guys. So if you're having a hard time, don't feel bad about it. Just know that you're loved and you're appreciated, and we want you here. At least by me. I love you. Anyway, so let's get into it. So like I said, Lemp Mansion is in St. Louis, Missouri. It's quite an old building, but we're actually going to talk about the family history. And the family history starts with a man named Johann Lemp, but we know him as Adam Lemp. He was born in 1798 in what is now Polheim, Germany. He came to the U.S. in 1836. He settled in St. Louis in 1838, and by 1841, he was a U.S. citizen. He worked as a grocer for the beginning part of him living here. He sold groceries, obviously, things, that we're used to, like bread and fruit, things like that, and he also specialized in vinegar and beer. Of course he did. He was a German man. So he made his own beer, and due to the large German population that is in St. Louis even now, but especially in that time, his beer became very popular because it was the traditional German way of brewing beer, and Germans like they country, So obviously people were really into Adam Lemp's brew, and in 1840, 2 years after he settled in St. Louis, he founded Western Brewery, and that is where Lemp Mansion has got its beginnings. Lemp Mansion started, Lemp Brewery specifically started as Western Brewery in 1840. I thought this was fun. Due to the popularity and all the storage they needed, Adam Lemp used a natural cave in St. Louis as storage because it's naturally refrigerated. And that was pretty popular for a lot of companies at the time, but I just thought it was kind of fun. And that still exists. It's called the Lemp Caverns. There's a haunted house that goes through there. It's incredibly popular. If you haven't been there, it's quite fun. Anyway, so Adam Lemp had some kids. One of those kids being William J. Lemp Sr. William Lemp was born in Germany, actually. He was born a year before Adam moved to the U.S. And when Adam died, William took over the company. And when William took over, it went great. The company flourished. It was very popular, and William Lemp changed the name to the William J. Lemp Brewing Company. So we've actually made it now to Lemp Brewing Co. William Lemp's son, William Jr., he will now be known as Billy. William's son, Billy, served as vice president of the company. William's son, Louis, served as superintendent. And William's son, Frederick, was supposed to take over the company when William died. But unfortunately, Frederick had some conditions. He had some health conditions, and Frederick died in 1901 of heart failure due to the amalgamation of all of his problems, unfortunately. And William Lemp Sr. took this very hard. He became distant. He was, sad. Obviously, I have never had my own children. I'm only 19, so I have had a couple pets, but they were family pets, so I guess they weren't really mine. I don't really have any fur babies that are mine personally, but even when our old dog Ozzy died, I took it really hard. So I understand why he was so sad. William's good friend Frederick Popst. Sounds like William just doesn't have a really good time with people named Frederick. Anyway, William's friend Frederick also died about a year after his son Frederick died. And this was just too much. And William Lemp Sr. committed suicide by gunshot on February 13th, 1904, just 3 years after his son Frederick died, which is incredibly sad. So after William Sr. died, Billy, or William Jr., took over the company the same year that William died, but a couple months afterward, on November 7th. And Billy married a woman named Lillian Handlin, I think. I don't know. I definitely could be pronouncing that wrong. But Billy married Lillian 5 years before he inherited the company in 1899. And Lillian was nicknamed the Lavender Lady, which I think is very fun. I would love to have a nickname like that when I die, especially. Could roam the hallways of some old enchanted building wearing only one color. But Lillian was not dead when she was nicknamed the Lavender Lady. It's just because she liked the color lavender and often was seen wearing the color lavender or holding a bag with the color lavender. But unfortunately, the Lavender Lady decided that JK, she didn't really like Billy, so they got divorced in 1908. And Lillian took Billy's only son, William III. There are a lot of Williams in our story today. Lillian had primary custody, and that, that really hurt Billy. Again, problems with children, I assume, are very difficult, especially only getting to see your child sometimes. I bet that's really hard. So Billy was not feeling great. And then in the 1920s, we all know the lovely story of Prohibition and how alcohol was illegal. So obviously an alcohol company was not doing so hot. It was still under Billy's care at the time in the 1920s, but it became too much for him, and Billy shot himself on December 29th, 1922, just right in the head. William Sr., who was Billy's dad, we talked about him a little bit ago, William Sr. also had another daughter. Her name is Elsa. Elsa Lemp is the youngest child of William, and Elsa married a man named Thomas Wright in 1910. They were in love, they were having a great time for about 8 years, and then they separated in 1918, and then got divorced in 1919. Elsa said the reason for their separation and eventual divorce was due to mental and physical abuse by Thomas. So that's not great. For obvious reasons, she had to get out of that marriage, but then lo and behold, they got remarried in 1920 in March, the beginning of March. And later in March, the same month of the same year, Elsa was found dead in her bed, a gunshot wound to the head. There's a lot of speculation whether or not Elsa actually shot herself or if it was a murder disguised as a suicide. We don't know. We just know that she's the third potential suicide in the Lemp family. It's really sad. It's really sad. Louis Lemp is the second oldest son of William Sr., the very first William we talked about. And he died of natural causes, so that's good. He died in 1931. But Charles Lemp, the third son of William Sr., so William had 4 kids. Charles began living in the Lemp Mansion in 1929. He's the final Lemp to live in the house, and he never married. He stayed there with his dog and his 2 servants. And his 2 servants actually were married, so he was the only one that was unmarried, besides his dog in the house. And Charles Lemp was kind of a weird dude. In 1941, he sent a letter to a South St. Louis funeral home detailing what they should do with his body after he died. These are the details that I could find. He told them to take his remains by ambulance to the Missouri crematory. He was not to be bathed, clothed, or changed, so in the same condition that he was as he died. He was to be cremated. And then his ashes were to be put in a wicker box, and that wicker box put on his farm. And there was to be no funeral, and no notice put in the paper. So basically just, he disappears. That was in 1941, but he didn't actually die until 1949. Unfortunately, it was also a suicide. It was a gunshot to the head. And his suicide note was found, and it reads, St. Louis, Missouri, May 9, 1949. In case I am found dead, blame it on no one but me, C.H.A. Lemp. So, there's no mistaking his death like there is with Elsa's. So that's the final Lemp to live in the Lemp Mansion, was Charles, and he did die in the Lemp Mansion. Edwin Lemp also, he worked at the brewery until 1913. He retired to his own estate called Cragworld Estate, and after he retired, he dedicated himself to all kinds of really cool stuff. Most notably, and his biggest dedication, was to the St. Louis Zoo, which actually has been awarded multiple awards. I don't know if you guys have ever been there. I hope you have. It's absolutely beautiful and lovely. Edwin Lemp died at 90, and his final thing to his caretaker was destroy all the art and all of the family heirlooms from the Lemps. So, thanks, Edwin. We have very little history from your family now. So that's all the Lemp family that we know that died. I actually have been to Lemp before. We did a dinner theater one time for my sister's birthday. We went around and we got a little tour of the house, and we went down to the kitchen, and in the kitchen there's a doorway that leads directly into the caverns, which is where all of the alcohol was kept. And I was the last one down there, and I was trying not to be spooked, trying to be brave. I was 12 or something? So of course I was trying to look cute for all my sister's hot friends that were there, and I swear to you, we went down to the kitchen, and as everyone was leaving, I looked back and looked into the caverns, and I swear I saw a person standing there. It was so freaking creepy. I didn't sleep for days after that. It was so wild. It looked like it was peeking out from, I'm getting chills even thinking about it. It looked like it was peeking out from behind the doorway. So creepy. So it's just about time for me to go and get our guest. So we'll do a nice little musical interlude. And then I will introduce our guest, and we'll get some fun stories. So I will see you all in just a minute. special guest. Special guest, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure thing, Sophie. Thank you for having me on this week. I am Jeff. I'm Sophie's dad, and glad to be with y'all.
Well, I'm glad to have you. I mentioned you earlier. I don't think you knew that, but I talked about how most of your family is in St. Louis and how you have some special connections to Lemp and the Mansion Brewery Haunted House. Would you mind elaborating?
Not at all. So, from the fall of 1993 through the falls of 94 and 95, I worked with Tom Carroll and his crew, working at and running and at a point designing and building for the haunted caverns of the Lemp Brewery under the original ownership. So we basically, for up to 6 months out of the year, worked 3 stories underground, 90, 100 foot, below the streets of South St. Louis at times, both during the day, designing, setting up, and building the haunted attraction. And then, of course, during the Halloween season at night, having customers come through and, with live actors and animatronics and, different props and whatnot set up to provide the haunted house experience. Later, after the haunted house, I had a partnership called United Front Productions, where my partner and I had office space in one of the other buildings in the Lemp Brewery, where I went to the Lemp Brewery complex to work every day. As far as the mansion goes, I've been to the mansion numerous times, both professionally and just as a consumer, to check out the dinner theaters and whatnot.
Yeah, we went for Abby's birthday that one year.
Sure.
I also mentioned that at the very end, and how we got a cool little tour of the mansion.
It's a neat place, both from the historical architecture of it, then of course from the history of the family and the paranormal connection.
Oh yeah, for sure. The history of the family is so sad, but it leads for some great stories, honestly.
Sure. Just in the years that I spent in and out of that complex, it's amazing the things I saw and experienced, and just from, oh my goodness, these eccentric, brewery millionaires from the late 1900s and early 2000 or late 1800s or early 1900s.
Yeah.
The eccentricities of a swimming pool built into a natural cave and caverns that connected the basement of their mansion to their brewery complex, and they had a bowling alley down there. Seriously, we found, early remnants of early electricity, and we're talking electricity from the 1910s, and
right.
One time, and I was still a smoker at the time, and I was going to light up a cigarette and realized my lighter wouldn't work. So I asked somebody else to borrow their lighter and realized their lighter wouldn't work. As we turned around to ask somebody else for a lighter, we realized, hey, wait a second, why is nobody's lighter working? And realized that we were running out of oxygen. We didn't have a canary with us or any other sensing gear, and we'd kind of just all gone into a place we weren't supposed to be on a whim. And frankly, if we wouldn't have tried to light cigarettes, we could have all been asphyxiated.
Wow, that's crazy. I just read a story on Reddit the other day of that happening. Basically, like, a guy was like dead in like a barn or something, and then they sent cops in to go find him, and they also died. And in the ambulance that came a few minutes later, both of those EMT people also died, because at standing level there was plenty of oxygen, but as soon as you bent down to check on those people, you got asphyxiated, because there was like, it was like the
carbon dioxide.
Yeah, it was crazy. Ground. That is so scary to think about.
It is.
Like, I don't endorse smoking, but at least you had some kind of warning sign.
Exactly. Yeah. It was. That was one of the last times I actually went into the cave system, and I know that since then they've taken even more precautions to make sure that those caves are no longer accessible by young, stupid kids like I was at the time.
There's an episode of Ghost Adventures where they go to Lemp and they're in the caves. And obviously there's lots of locked doors and stuff. And they're like, oh, we wish we could go in here. And I remember you always comment to me like, oh, I've been there and that's super dangerous.
So it's actually on that episode of Ghost Adventure, they're in the caverns. Those are the sub-basements of the brewery complex where they used to store beer and whatnot because of the constant temperature.
Yeah, I mentioned that, how it's a natural refrigerator. Right.
So the Ghost Adventures, though, they were actually never allowed to go into the actual Cherokee caves that connected the brewery to the mansion. Those are sealed, and the doors that they kept saying that they wish they could get through, that's where the caves are located behind there. It actually goes from being a improved. Don't get me wrong. A lot of the sub-basements are built in the space the caves occupied, but they've all got improved walls and smooth concrete floors, or at least semi-smooth after a couple hundred years.
Yeah.
But once you go through that door, you're in natural caverns. And that's where they took these natural caverns and made smooth paths, but really it's still just a cave. Now, yes, they built a bowling alley in the cave, and yes, they built a swimming pool and whatnot in the cave, and put electric lights in, but at the end of the day, it's still a cave, and still stalagmites, stalactites, uneven floors, dripping water. At one point, I guess before Highway 55 was built, those caves actually went all the way down to the Mississippi River. There's talk about how during Prohibition you could get from the basements of the Lemp Brewery complex to the river and, perhaps load up barges with illegal beverages at the time.
No, there was definitely, when I was doing research about this, there was all kinds of talks about how, especially during Prohibition, a lot of brewing companies would put their stuff down in the cave and you could go down there because it was all naturally refrigerated, or at least in that area, it was more refrigerated, plus it was underground, so it was way harder to track,
Sure, lots of speakeasies and whatnot.
For sure.
But if you think about it, if it's 1903 and 95 degrees in the summertime and you're a rich eccentric brewing mogul and want to have a party, what better place to have it than in a cave with the fresh new invention of electric lights, with a couple hundred of your closest friends, all the beer you can brew, and a nice 65 degree evening.
Right.
Or temperature. It's like, it's natural air conditioning. It'd be a great place to hang out, and I can certainly see why they did it.
Yeah.
It's, like I said, dangerous and, not as appealing outside of the historical value of it now, but, still, it's easy to see how that would have happened. I mean, I can't say I wouldn't have done it if I had the opportunity.
I mean, I might still... just go hang out in a cave for a little bit.
We'd have to find a safer cave. Yeah.
Well, you think? I don't think I've ever been inside the caverns, but obviously you've got some fun stories from in there. Do you have any you want to share? Any, maybe ghost stories? Or, because Lemp Mansion specifically is known pretty well for having some paranormal activity, obviously with all the trauma that's happened.
Sure.
But anything about the caverns or the caves you want to share?
I mean, sure. There's a couple of times... there's a number of times that weird things happened. There's no doubt. Even people that don't believe in any kind of paranormal activity come out of some of those situations shaking their heads. There's times that I saw things that, even as a skeptic, you had to say, okay, that was difficult or different. There was one night during operations of the haunted house. It was just another night, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, middle of the week, kind of a slow evening. But the haunted house was running and there was live people in it. And we were in the area of the haunted house that we used to call the forest. And it was toward the end of the haunted attraction, or the maze, the walk through the maze of the haunted house. Mm-hmm. So the forest was this long corridor. It was built into one of the sub-basements, and basically we had taken the whole area. It was probably 50 foot wide by a couple 100 feet long, and brought down, big limbs and trees and netting and rocks and fake rocks and everything we could to basically make it look outside, even to the point of, having a fake moon up on one end of it. And we'd fill it with smoke and whatnot, and it gave a very creepy outdoor feel, even though you were, 3 stories under. Well, next to the forest, all along that, 100 or so foot corridor, there was a straight line hallway, call it. You'd come out of one scene, you'd make a turn, you'd walk down this long hallway, then you'd make another turn and you'd be in the forest. So I was coming out of a security door that was right on the edge of the forest, and I, always carried a flashlight, and I was had a walkie-talkie and an earpiece in, and was just going about my business. And I came around the corner, and I was hurrying up the ramp on the hallway, just with my flashlight pointed down, talking to somebody on the radio, and all of a sudden it got really cold, and the front edge of my flashlight, catches movement on the ground, and I look up, and as I'm walking, there's this little girl, probably 8-10 years old, in like an old-timey dress, something from the late 1800s, say.
Sure.
Just standing there looking at me, and I kind of stepped right into her, into the same space she was in, and it, like I said, it was cold, and then I jumped and, shined my flashlight around, and there's nobody else there. And, it was plain as day. There was someone standing in front of me, and then there wasn't. And it's weird because you spend your time and energy trying to set up all these gags or props and scenes,
artificial
to scare people.
Yeah.
And then out of nowhere there's something that just scares the
like,
crap
hey.
out of you that shouldn't be there. And
that'd be terrifying.
It was different. That one was, it was freaky, it was weird. It makes you question, what did I really just see, or where'd that come from? Because there was very few people that spent any real amount of time there that didn't just agree it was haunted.
Yeah.
There was, it was hard to spend any time there and not
have
quote
some
unquote
kind of
believe.
You
You had to believe. It was just too in your face to not.
I have one final question to ask.
Sure.
Have you ever heard of Zeke, the little boy who lives in the mansion?
There's a lot of stuff that people say about the mansion, from old ladies to little boys to, grown men knocking around in the hallways. I've heard all kinds of stories coming out of there. As far as anyone specifically called Zeke, I'm not familiar with that particular name.
The main thing with Zeke is that he is one of the most well-documented little boys in this mansion that, obviously people can Photoshop and do all kinds of crazy stuff to pictures, but he's the most well-documented, and a lot of people think that he was an illegitimate child of one of the Lemps with a prostitute, and
he's the one that's always supposedly outside the third floor bedroom.
Right, he was the one that was chained up in the attic, which is incredibly sad.
Yep.
But I didn't know if you knew anything about him because
like
you
I
worked
said,
there.
I've heard a lot about it. I've been in that third floor bedroom. I actually sat in there for about an hour alone once, just to see what would happen. But it was during the day, and nothing happened while I was there. But I've met a lot. Like I said, I know a lot of people who have spent even more time in the mansion than I have, and that hallway and the area outside the third floor bedroom where the access to the attic is just well known to be,
spooky.
Yeah, it's just haunted. Stuff happens there, and whether it's because you're sensitive to it or hypersensitive or have an active imagination, or frankly just it's a place where ghosts hang out, it doesn't matter. It's just you take the risk of seeing something that maybe doesn't agree with your worldview when you spend time in places like that. Yeah.
Well, thank you for spending time with me.
No, definitely, anytime. I got you, kiddo. But the Lemp's an interesting place. It it is a really neat historic part of our city. Just like other historic parts, if we don't maintain them, we lose them. And unfortunately, I think this one's probably destined to be lost.
Well, at least we still have all the history. We know the family.
Can always read it in a book.
You can always read it in the book or listen to it in the podcast.
That's right. Listen to the podcast. That's the way to go.
All right. Well, I guess that finishes us up for this week. Make sure to give me a follow on Instagram and Facebook at Hey Teacups. My personal Instagram is always linked in the bio. If you guys have any questions, comments, concerns, or ghost stories that you'd like to share, make sure to send them to my email. And I will see you guys in the next video. Happy sifting!